I'm also here with my co-professor, who I'd like to have him introduce himself very briefly.
Hello, everyone. My name is Dr. Alex Evans, Alex Evans, co-teaching the clinic here, and my specialty is in the area of international education justice. So I'm very excited to be a part. Thank you.
All right, and I think you're in for a treat this morning or afternoon, depending on where you're zooming in from, because we have 8 expert Howard University law students who are going to talk about their projects this semester. Their projects are part of what we call the Black Audit Project. It's based on this theory of change that we have, which is using the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals to explore the state of human rights for Black Americans in different cities around the country. We know that too often, although nations around the world and cities around the world are keeping close tabs on the progress that they're making towards the UN Sustainable Development Goals for the broader country, very rarely do they disaggregate that data and keep those same close tabs on the progress being made in African American communities. When we actually look at the data, we have found that there has been a wider disparity and a bigger hill to climb for people of African descent in these cities. And part of the work that we're doing here at Howard University, just a reminder, we are the nation's oldest historically Black law school in the country, part of what we think is the best historically Black college or university in the country. I know some people may disagree, but we think we're right about that. So our mission has been to ensure that we document what is happening in our community with the understanding that, good to see you here from Brazil, with the understanding that if we are going to seriously make a run at trying to bridge the gap between our current state of affairs and actually reaching the SDGs, we're going to have to take much more aggressive action, perhaps even adopt a campaign of reparations to ensure that we meet the Sustainable Development Goals. So this project is the beginning of that audit. I'm also part of the United Nations Permanent Forum on People of African Descent. That is a new body which was created by the UN Human Rights Council in 2021. And one of our mandates is to collect disaggregated data on people of African descent. So the work both fits into the mandate for the United Nations Permanent Forum and is part of our curriculum here at Howard University School of Law and our Movement Lawyering Clinic. And finally, it's part of just our broader campaign to fight for the rights of people of African descent here in the United States and around the world. So we're very excited to share our findings with you this morning. And Dr. Bond, I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you. If you'd like to get started with your first student, I'll just give the audience a little bit of overview on how we'll proceed while you get that together. We've got 7 to 8 students. This is Professor Hansford's class. It's going to be our forum, our event today. There will be 7 to 8 students. They'll be presenting about 4 to 5 minutes each. Each of them have selected a city. And I'll just leave you in anticipation of what cities were selected and why. I see a wonderful smile there from someone on the screen. It's nice to see your faces. And please do hold your questions at the end. You can chat them and we'll also let you unmute. We may go over a few minutes at the end. If you can hang on and stay with us, we'll be able to have a wonderful conversation. I know all of you are very interested in finding out what are the best and worst cities for people of African descent. And you'll hear a good deal of that, and hopefully you'll get a sense of that by the time we're done. So we'll just pause until Professor Hansford, they're getting things together, and we'll be sharing the screen here shortly. Thank you.
All right, 1 second. We're gonna work on our technical difficulties for a moment, Dr. Bond, and then we'll get ready to get started.
Absolutely. While he does that, I want to give a shout out to some of my students at Howard University, Department of Curriculum and Instruction. I see we have Emmanuel Lapoto from Burkina Faso. Thank you, welcome. We know it's late there. Who else do we have? See here. Feel free to put your name, where you're from in the chat area. Thank you, Lucia Rodriguez, for joining us from SDSN USA. Hello from Waterloo, Canada, Region Community Foundation. Thank you. Thank you for joining us. We have some new messages. I'll just scroll down.
All right. All right. I think we're about to get ready to get started, Dr. Bond.
Thank you.
All right. So thank you all for joining us here. Can you all see our slides?
We can. Thank you.
Okay. All right. So the slideshow is, let's see.
We can see them, but they're not in slideshow view. Oh, yeah, you've got
There we go. All right, great. All right, we're set. All right. Thank you for your patience here. All right, so as we mentioned earlier, we are applying the United Nations metric for Sustainable Development Goals, part of the 2030 program designed to transform our world, to our analysis of what is happening with African Americans in 8 cities around the country. This is the lineup of the cities that we have begun looking at thus far. As you can see, it encompasses all of the regions around the country thus far. We're going to start here in the Northeast with the city of Baltimore and with Ayanna Watkins.
Hello, everybody. My name is Ayanna Watkins, and I did Baltimore, Maryland. So for a little background, I was actually born and raised in Baltimore, and I wanted to kind of go back and do the SDG project just to kind of see what the state of the city was in, and just to kind of monitor some data that was there. So for history, Baltimore is one of the most historical cities. The first railroad was in Baltimore. Baltimore was the home of America's first Catholic seminary. It also was the inspiration for the Star Spangled Banner. Baltimore was also the first city below the Mason-Dixon line 2 years before Brown v. Board made segregation illegal. And it also is home of one of the 2 HBCUs, which are Morgan State and Coppin. So this is for population for Baltimore. So as you can see, it is predominantly African-American city with almost 63%. There's about 29% white population, 3.2 more, Asian 2.48, etc. And from my research, the past couple of years, the Black and African-American rate has declined about 2%, and other races have increased significantly due to gentrification, homelessness, inflation, etc. There is just not enough fluidity for African Americans in Baltimore to thrive. And that was reoccurring in my research and throughout our experience actually talking to residents from Baltimore. Baltimore homelessness is one of the main issues that I wanted to address. As you can see, if you've ever driven through Baltimore, it's very apparent that this is a main issue that occurs through there. As we stated previously, 62% of Baltimore's population is Black and African American. However, 74% of the population of Black African American is homeless. So as you can see, those numbers are very shocking because 74% of the homeless people in Baltimore are Black people. And it's obviously apparent as you go through, and they're all over the place. And as you can see, there's a bunch of abandoned buildings, places where, they could potentially thrive, but there's just not enough resources and not enough places for them to actually be placed. So nearly half live below the 200% of the federal poverty line, throughout research, I saw that some of the median incomes for Baltimore residents were about $20,000 to $30,000 being relatively high. And as we can see with today's society with inflation, that is just not livable for most people. And that's a major issue, mainly due to education. Most of them don't even finish high school, let alone any extra undergraduate or higher education. So this is one of the main issues, is just education, poverty, and just kind of getting them through the school system and actually thriving once they're finished. And the crime rate in Baltimore is one of the top 10 most dangerous cities to be in, with the homicide rate being extremely high. This is a little map of the Baltimore, and this is the homicide rate. And I grew up a little bit north of this, but as you can see, their population from in the middle, where Baltimore is extremely, extremely high. There was a point in 2020 where there was about 72 shootings per month and homicides and actual killings, which is pretty astronomical when you put it into perspective. So one of the main issues that I wanted to touch on was just crime, homelessness. People don't feel safe just walking through, going to class, going to work. And this is one of the main issues that we wanted to touch on. So I conducted my town hall on April 17th in Baltimore. I conducted my town hall at Morgan State University, and we touched on a lot of topics at this town hall. One of the main issues is that no matter what type of funding that they get or what kind of extra help that they get, the Baltimore residents still feel a sense of hopelessness. They still feel as though there's not much help, there's not much presence, and that there's just not much to work around. They kind of feel like their city is deteriorating and no one seems to care. And they're obviously well aware of all the issues because, as we stated, most of them are very apparent. You can't miss the homelessness, you can't miss the crime, you can't miss the gunshots, but they just needed more presence, actual, institutional changes, et cetera. So one of the things that we kind of talked about is just how to make that happen and just to kind of, help the youth actually work. They all talked about how they didn't have anywhere to go during the summertime, how they just kind of wanted to get them off the street. They would help them during the summer. Once the school started, there was nowhere for them to go. College is not something that they dream of or think about, where some people it's just pretty automatic. So that's one of the few things that we talked about. I know some of my other colleagues have to go, but overall, I think Baltimore really needs a lot of help. I think even from my short time living there for about 8 years when I was younger to now, it has deteriorated extremely. And they really need a revamp completely. And in order to get all these SDGs to actually prosper, there needs to be a larger turnaround with poverty, with education, et cetera. So I will turn it over to my next colleague.
Right. Thank you. Ellen. Let me see there.
Hello, my name is Precious Patterson, and I have selected Washington, D.C. And so, as you know, of course, this is the nation's capital. And I selected Washington, D.C. not only because I attend school here, but because in undergrad I did some work with alternative spring break with Vanderbilt University. And we came up here and we worked in the area of homelessness. And that's when I noticed that there's a huge issue with homelessness in our nation's capital, and that it very disproportionately impacts people of African descent. And so my question is there truly liberty and justice for all in our nation's capital? And here you can see a national monument, but you also see a tent with a person who doesn't have a home. And as we drive through DC, this is something that we notice on a regular basis. We notice the disparity in wealth. So during my time doing work here before attending law school here, I definitely noticed either someone was homeless or they were walking by in a suit. And so the total population is 45.8% Black, yet Black people account for 86% of the homeless population here in DC. And DC, ironically, as the nation's capital, has the highest level of income inequality along racial lines in the United States. And what I think is very telling is this was 2010, I couldn't find a more recent map, but it seems pretty accurate from what I've seen in DC so far, is that there's definitely a huge Black population in Ward 7 and 8. And as you look at maps of DC, because I've included a few more, you will see that a lot of the issues that the 17 SDGs touch on seem to be darker along Ward 7 and 8 on these maps because they disproportionately impact DC's Black population. For example, when you look at the poverty rates in DC, you see Ward 7 and 8 there, the darker colors, that's the highest poverty rate. So there are more people in Ward 7 and 8, i.e. more people of African descent who are suffering from poverty or living below the poverty line. And this also is very relevant when you think about income. And here you can see the median income of Black DC residents, and you see for Black residents, it is less than 1/3 of the median income of white residents. And also Black people are significantly more likely to live in poverty in DC, and that's 5 times more likely than their white counterparts. You can even see this, I'm gonna skip ahead here to the way that COVID-19 impacted the Black population in DC. Here you see, once again, Ward 7 and 8, darker. There was a disproportionate impact on Black DC residents when it comes to the death rates from COVID-19. And then just jumping back to the crime rates, once again, you see right there, more crime in those areas. And Washington and DC, basically the same thing, but here you see Washington, DC, you have 502 crimes per square mile. And if you look down there, you'll see the national median. It's just 26.8. So crime is a huge issue here. And when you break it down in terms of violent crime, it's 9.84 per 1,000 residents, and the national median is only 4. So it's a bigger issue than it is in other places in the United States for sure, and this is the nation's capital. And the final point I'll touch on is DC maternal mortality rate. And Black people account for 90% of pregnancy-related deaths in DC. And so these deaths include not only maternal mortality rate, but any deaths that occur within 1 year of a pregnancy due to pregnancy-related complications. And this is true, although Black people account for only one half of all births. So only 50% of all births, but 90% of the pregnancy-related deaths in DC. And then the Black maternal mortality rate nationally for Black people is 47.2 per 100,000 live births, which is already an issue. But when you look at it compared to that of the DC Black maternal mortality rate, it's even more egregious, 70.9 per 100,000 live births. And so with that in mind, I haven't conducted my town hall yet. Hopefully it will be Thursday, May 4th at 5:30 p.m. We'll have confirmation this Friday, and it will be held at Howard University School of Law here. And what I'm mostly looking for is to get a sense of what these organizations think are some good solutions that they have been implementing, as well as good solutions that they think other people can potentially help implement. And I am definitely most interested in working with Black Women's Health Imperative and Black Women's Agenda just to tackle this issue of the egregious Black maternity mortality rate here. Thank you all.
Thanks for the questions. Next we have.
Hello, everyone. I'm Leandre Alexan, and My city is Louisville. I'm not originally from there, but with all the things happening in the headlines, it's definitely an interesting city, and I learn a lot through this project. So, and talking about the problems of Louisville, I think it's very important to talk about the history, and I'll try to glide through it as swiftly as possible. So African Americans were like among the first residents of Louisville, and at the time, Louisville became part of the Union in 1792, but at the time there were still slaves there as well as free slaves. And the reason why Kentucky slavery was still prominent, even though they didn't have necessarily a large plantation agriculture, is because the Gulf states had a demand in cotton, and that's what sustained the slavery in Kentucky. And then when we move into talking about like the communities of Black people in Louisville, we see that while free people of color were subjected to like discrimination and limitations, they were able to enter into contracts, own businesses, own property. And because of that, now we see like Black churches were originally from then, Black fraternal organizations, including the local Underground Railroad. When we look at the era of racial segregation, to maintain the subordination of Afro-Americans, white people needed new means, and thus there was a color line that delineated that created two separate worlds in a separate but unequal world for African Americans that exacerbated discrimination, poverty, poor housing, crimes, and police brutality. Then in the desegregation and civil rights era, the goal of African Americans became shifted from making separate as equal as possible to overthrowing both the principle and the fact of racial segregation. However, because of that, as interracial social distance narrowed, interracial social distance widened as class divisions grew more pronounced between the Black middle class and Black poor and working poor on the other hand. And in the post-civil rights era, the end of legal segregation brought African Americans closer, but still failed to achieve the goal of racial equality. And when we look at the quick facts, the population's at 621K, and of that population, you can see that Black people or African Americans makes about 1/4, and the remaining 3/4 approximately is white people. And unfortunately, the poverty rate is at 18%, and 34% of that is made of Black people, and then the 11% is white poverty rates. And we can see that when we compare education, the less education that you have, the least likely that you will be employed, and thus you'll have a higher rate of poverty. And then when we talk about housing, which is a problem, we can see that in the beginning times of Louisville, African Americans were a little bit more complex in the areas that they lived, including areas east and west of downtown. But like many other cities, Louisville went urban renewal. And these renewal plans targeted and demolished inner city core neighborhoods that occupied primarily African Americans and some poor and working class whites. And because of that, Blacks from these neighborhoods moved into the far western sections of the city. And a big problem of that is even though policies like the Fair Housing Act and the Voting Rights Acts were enacted to fight racial discrimination and shadow the legacy of redlining, despite these efforts, Louisville remained deeply segregated with Black population mainly concentrated in the West End. And segregation in the West End grew in the 1960s when 50,000 white residents left due to declining property values following the 1968 riots in Parkland. And I thought it was really interesting and a good representation of Louisville at the time by including a picture of Muhammad Ali's childhood home in Louisville to represent, just essentially what's happening in the housing market in west side of Louisville. and a prominent figure from local. And then the solutions, I guess it incorporates, SDG goal number 1, eliminating poverty, and number 4, education. In terms of short-term goals, healthcare, increasing access to healthcare, decreasing policing, and providing affordable housing to individuals, and make sure that homeless people have shelter. And in terms of long-term solutions, when we look at education, we need to provide a quality education that raises the achievement levels of all students, with emphasis on narrowing the gap between Black and white students. You need to insist that all teachers have high expectations and assess them accordingly for their students. And then we need to adopt requirements for continuing education for diversity, for continuing employees. When in terms of youth employment, we can employ African-American youth, particularly from economically disadvantaged communities, and we can put them in community service positions with an emphasis of a mentorship role for younger students. And then lastly, we need to continue ongoing research. Certain issues aren't as heavily researched as they should be. And by doing so, we can think of more narrow and tailored solutions. And now I'll pass it on to my colleague.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Deja Moore. The city that I focused on was New Orleans, Louisiana. And I chose this city because I attended Xavier University in New Orleans for a bit. And I really became connected to the culture there. So I wanted to be able to focus on this to see if we can bring a lot of the issues that the people there are facing to the light, because they deserve it. So the city of New Orleans is overwhelmingly Black. In 2005, before Hurricane Katrina, its population was 67.3% Black. But now, because of Katrina, with the displacement of many Black residents there, and not being able to come back to their homes because their insurance didn't cover getting their homes fixed, and most of them couldn't afford to because they already were doing jobs that didn't pay much. And some of the Black residents are starting to return, but again, they're being pushed out because of gentrification and not being able to afford the cost of living with housing there. And I'll discuss that a little bit more. But as you can see, in 2000, the population for Black residents was a lot higher than it is now. And it's connected to a lot of these issues that are directly affecting its Black residents. So one of the biggest issues, I thought it would be more focused on like environmental issues, but I think one of the bigger issues within New Orleans is actually education. And so I had my town hall on this past Monday, April 24th. I think that one of the things that I learned was that all of the issues are interconnected, and the reason why a lot of the issues are going on is because the foundation is not being laid within education, and it's not allowing them to receive an education that would allow them to get higher paying jobs. So one of the biggest issues is funding being divested from the local public schools, and they're being used to open charter schools. And so charter schools, they're not required to follow the same type of curriculum. They set up their own curriculum. So in a lot of these schools, they're not necessarily teaching like the foundational things. Some of the residents were saying that students that can't even read are being moved up and they're being graduated, but the fundamentals are not there, because that leads into number 2. They're being taught by inexperienced teachers. So in New Orleans, actually 55% of schools now are charter schools, and they're being taught by inexperienced teachers from programs like Teach for America. So in Teach for America, they're bringing outside people from other states into New Orleans, and they're not familiar with the culture. They're not familiar with a lot of the social issues that the students are facing. So it's lacking. And then they also don't have actual certification. So a student straight out of college can go work for Teach for America and teach these students that are already disadvantaged. And number 3 is the lack of scholarship opportunities for higher education. So something that was being expressed during the town hall was that students they're not necessarily going to college because of the fact that they can't afford to. And there are a few programs like TOPS that are giving scholarships to students, and it pays for full rides, but it's limited in the amount of students that it helps. And it's like for the top students. So some of the solutions that are being proposed are investing in community schools and hiring local educators. And the second is allocating funding to support college students and actually prepare them to succeed in college, and not just limiting the scholarship to the top students, because even so, those students are getting to the schools, but some of them are dropping out because they're not being actually prepared to succeed in college. And so if you see, I should have brought this up before, but if you see the difference in the graduation rate across the different races, right now, what I was talking about is that they're not succeeding with higher education. The lowest graduation rate for getting a bachelor's degree is amongst the Black community in New Orleans. And so that leads into the next issue that they're facing in New Orleans, which is like labor issues and employment. So the reason why there's not a lot of upward mobility is because a lot of residents in New Orleans are doing low-paying jobs. So their labor opportunities are really just limited to the service and tourist industry. So they work in the restaurants, they work in the hotels, they do tours for tourists, because tourism is such a big part of the economy within New Orleans. And these employees are making millions for the city, but they're not being paid livable wages because housing has gotten so expensive due to gentrification. And they're only making $7.25 for minimum wage. And even the people who are getting higher paying jobs like management, they're making $16 maximum. And so another issue that goes hand in hand with that is that the higher paying jobs are being outsourced to people that are not from New Orleans. And so when this is being done, they're taking all of the jobs that the Black New Orleanians could be getting, and they're not even giving Black New Orleanians like that opportunity to be able to get those jobs and experience upward mobility. And some of the solutions that are proposed were creating more programs that invest into Black youth. So like I was talking about with the foundation, if we start young, then if the programs are there to prepare them to get jobs that prepare them to get skills that would allow them to get those higher paying jobs, then they could begin to experience upward mobility. And also one of the things that I came up with personally would be like hiring the Black natives to do like seasonal jobs instead of hiring outsourcing labor. So everybody knows about Mardi Gras. You know, there's beads, there's cups, people come from all over the world, and there's a lot of pollution during that time in New Orleans. And there's stormwater drains in New Orleans, and a lot of the beads and stuff, because of the rainfall, they get stuck inside the drains. And they outsource and they hire these different companies and people from different states to come in and clean up. But instead of them doing that, they could just get Black natives to do those jobs and like pay them for every amount of beads. Like if the more beads that you pick up or the more trash that you pick up, the more that you get paid. So I think that could be another alternative. And for the last issue, the last really big issue in New Orleans is housing. Gentrification is causing housing shortages in New Orleans. And because people are coming from different places, they're paying higher, they're paying more for houses. So they're paying higher mortgages, and then it's bringing up the property value. And now the natives can't afford it anymore. And so one of those issues that goes hand in hand is also the flood insurance. Flood insurance in New Orleans is ridiculous, and it's continued to increase annually. And that once the flood insurance increases, even for people that aren't house owners, it affects them because it causes the owners of the homes to increase the rent for the tenants so that they can pay for the flood insurance. And then this is what I also touched on the poor draining system. So because their stormwater drains are not great, whenever it's just like regular rainfall, it floods really, really badly in residential areas. And this is a normal occurrence in New Orleans and they've gotten used to it, but it shouldn't be. And the reason that it is that way is because the drainage system needs to be updated. And that's actually hand in hand with one of the solutions. The reason why the drainage system is so bad is because they use concrete. And if they were to use things like grass, it would be able to absorb the water instead of it just kind of rolling off with the concrete because it doesn't absorb anything. And then also another solution is building sustainable homes so that even if flooding is a problem, it can withstand the flooding and hurricanes, and then flood insurance wouldn't be as high as it is because these companies know that they're going to have to pay for the damage done to the homes because they're all sitting so low and they're not able to withstand the natural disasters that are happening, which are the hurricanes in New Orleans. And then also opportunity for higher paying jobs so that the natives won't get pushed out, goes hand in hand again with the employment issue within New Orleans. And so I think that the thing that I really got from a town hall is that all these issues are so interconnected. And I think that if more funding is put into the education, that it could have a domino effect in just bettering the quality of life for Black New Orleanians. Thank you. I'm going to pass it to my next colleague.
Thank you. Now this student is actually zooming in from a different location. So Sage, if you're able to speak, I can control the slideshow from here. Is that okay?
Perfect. Yeah. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. So my name is Sage Stewart, and I am going to be reporting on Miami, Florida. I am originally from Florida, not Miami. There is definitely a difference between South Florida and the rest of Florida, but it's still really important to talk about the issues that are facing the state as a whole. And I think that they are really exacerbated when you look at Miami as a case study. So I'm ready for the next slide. So just to give you some background on Miami, Miami, similar to the rest of the country, was quite literally built on Black labor. So when Henry Flagler originally decided that he wanted to build the Royal Palm Hotel, it was a luxury hotel that was built on the Miami River. He went and collected immigrants from the Bahamas and also Black migrants from Georgia to help build the hotel. And from there, he started the campaign to incorporate the city of Miami. And out of the 367 votes that were needed to incorporate the city, 162 of them were Black. And you would think that with that, you know, the Black population would be given some type of credit and power within the city, the new founded city. Unfortunately, that was not the case. Black residents were pushed to the edges of the city. Well, not the edges, sorry, they were pushed further inland, while all of the white tourists and residents were allowed to stay on the desired beachfront. So this persisted for an extended period of time. By the time we get up to the 1990s, there were a number of riots and Black-led tourism boycotts that were basically saying that it was not right the way that Black residents had been treated. And because of that, the county agreed to implement a number of programs to empower Black residents. This program was specifically called the Metro Miami Action Plan. And the purpose was to boost Black home ownership and business development. But in the past few decades, many of these programs have either been whittled away or they just don't have the support that they need to actually support Black empowerment. So to give you some general facts on Miami, 17.4% of the population is Black. That's just under 500,000. These statistics are specific to Miami-Dade County. South Florida in general, which includes Broward County and a few others, obviously has a much larger Black Black population. And typically when you talk about Miami, you talk about all of South Florida, but I am specifically talking about Miami-Dade County. So when you look at the poverty rate, 15.2% is Black. 15.2% of Miami suffers from poverty. It's the 9th highest in the entire country, and 22% of that population is Black residents. Along with that, 74% of Miami's Black and Latinx populations lives in liquid asset poverty. That basically means that if they were to lose their jobs, they do not have the liquid assets to support themselves for about a 3-month period, which would be about how long it would take to get a new job. And then we also look at the household income, with Black residents having a income of about nearly $46,000 as compared to their white counterparts that have a median income of $64,000. We can also see disparities in the medical treatment of the Black population. Florida was obviously very hard hit by the COVID pandemic, Miami in particular. But when you break down the numbers, the Black population was 25% more likely to contract the virus than anyone else in the city. When you also look at education, 18% of Black residents have a bachelor's degree compared to 31.4% overall. We can also look at food insecurities. 36% of Black residents suffer from food insecurities and are on the food stamp and SNAP programs as compared to 25% overall for the county. And then Miami-Dade is also the most segregated county in Florida. And it's the 32nd in the country. Miami is also an outlier when it comes to major Southern cities, as it's the only metro to have never elected a Black mayor following the civil rights movement. So all of the previous Southern cities that have been discussed before mine, they've all had not one, but multiple Black mayors. Miami-Dade has never had that. And I think that this just further speaks to the disparity in the county, especially with how the Black residents are living. I'm ready for the next slide. So I chose to focus my research on 2 main points when looking at Miami, and they are very interconnected to each other. My first point is on poverty. So within Miami, as we briefly touched on already, the median income for the Black population is stark in comparison to its counterparts. You can also look at census data that indicates that more than 60% of Miami-Dade residents pay more than 30% of their salary on housing. And the typical approach to housing is that you should be paying no more than 30%. So with 60% of the county already paying well over this, you can see that the cost of living in Miami is just ridiculous. We can also move on and look at how only 43% of Miami households qualify as the middle class. So Miami's middle class has been drastically shrinking. Miami actually has one of the highest concentrations of billionaires in the United States. There are 35, which is about 5%. And this is just such a stark difference from the fact that a significant portion of the population in Miami are wage workers. They are blue class people who are making only about $30,000 a year. So then we can also look to Black residents that are 2.5% more likely to live in poverty than their white counterparts. So poverty in Miami is rampant, and the Black population is the one that's suffering the most from it. We can also look to just a few people that have spoken on the issue. In particular, there was one quote that I thought was very pertinent. It said that Miami has attracted the richest people in the world, and more of them are coming, but it also has an economy based on tourism and hospitality and service, which is generating some of the lowest wages in the United States. So it's by definition one of the most unequal economies in the nation. Miami, the entire state of Florida in 2020 elected to impose a new minimum wage program. So by the year 2026, minimum wage should reach $15 an hour. Currently, they're at $11 an hour, which will come into effect in September. So the state of Florida is slowly making progress, but $11 an hour is a stark contrast to having 35 billionaires living up the street from you. And then additionally, with, sorry, I wasn't ready for the next slide yet. Give me a second. So with these poverty issues, we can also see that not only is this hitting the Black communities, but the Black communities are relegated to specific neighborhoods within Miami. And these pockets of poverty are more concentrated. So in some of these communities, things seem to have been getting better for a bit, but then when the recession hit in 2008, all of the progress that had been seen in Miami immediately came to a halt. And while other areas were able to recover, the Black population in Miami just never saw that. They just, at this point, are much worse off than they were before the recession. Okay, now we can go to the next slide. So the second issue that I will be looking at is gentrification. Gentrification is a huge issue in the Miami area. In the last few years, Miami has seen a huge increase in its population, and also with people migrating to the area. There was a huge implosion with the pandemic. A lot of people moved there because they were able to work remote, and they enjoyed the fact that Florida does not have a state tax, as well as there were less restrictions. So when you look at gentrification in Miami, what we can see is that in 2018, 42% of Black households owned a home versus 65% for whites. And this number has quickly been shrinking. So the Black population in Miami is largely living in areas called Little Haiti and Overtown, but these are more inland areas. They were originally undesirable locations because they were not beachfront. But as the sea levels have started to rise within Miami, populations that were originally living on the beach have slowly started to encroach in these areas. And you can see from one of the pictures posted here, Little Haiti is not for sale, but there have been investors that have been moving into these areas, moving into Little Haiti and Overtown, and starting new constructions that are driving up prices for taxes and also housing costs, and effectively forcing out the Black populations that have lived there for generations. Another issue that Miami is facing that's contributing to gentrification is brain drain and language barriers. So for the Black population that does make it to college and graduates, a lot of them are leaving the area because the opportunities are not there for them. So they're going to other cities that they feel empower the Black population more. So a lot of them are flocking either to neighboring Broward County or to Atlanta and even to Washington, D.C. And then the issue with the language barrier is that although Spanish has been spoken in Miami since its conception, there are still populations there that do not speak the language, and it has become almost a requirement to speak Spanish to be able to receive a job in Miami. So for these Black populations that do not have the language, they are being boxed out from other economic opportunities. There's also a concern about the tech industry. Tech is obviously exploding, and although it had originally been concentrated in the Bay Area of San Francisco, with the pandemic, a lot of jobs had moved to remote, and people that had originally been working office jobs in California were able to start looking elsewhere for living opportunities because it was a lot cheaper for them. So as you can see in the top right corner, this is a tweet that is on a billboard in San Francisco, and it's from the mayor of Miami, and it's basically saying, thinking about moving to Miami, DM me. So there was a huge campaign for people in the tech industry to consider relocating to the Miami area. There's also been an investment in getting tech companies to start up in Miami. And with this, obviously, these people that work for the tech companies are making a significant amount more than the local population, and it's just further driving them out. My final point on gentrification is Magic City. Magic City is, again, another Black neighborhood within Miami, and developers have started to move into this area. They are planning to create a large strip mall. And once it's put in place, there are concerns that, again, it's going to just drive up the cost of everything in the area and force out these residents that have lived there for generations and won't be able to keep up with the cost of living. So just something to know, in the last 10 years, the number of condos and apartments in this area increased 42%. And up to 65% of those condos have been priced at $1 million and above. So the local economy cannot afford to buy into these housing opportunities that have opened up. And unfortunately, a lot of these housings that have opened are not just being brought out by tech or others that are moving across the country to flocking to Miami. There are also foreign buyers that have become interested in Miami and are moving there and buying up the area. So now we can go to my last slide. Just to further conceptualize what's going on, here is a map of Miami, and next to it is a map of the development that's going on within the city. As you can see, on the coast, these are what were traditionally the white areas. And then as you move further inland, you see Little Haiti and Overton and Little Havana. All these areas were traditionally for minority communities, largely Black held areas. These areas are being encroached on by developers that are seeing economic opportunities. They're seeing this cheap land and they're buying it up and putting in mega condos and shopping centers, and unfortunately pushing out the population that has lived there for generations and just cannot afford to stay there anymore. So as solutions for Miami, Miami has unfortunately failed its Black population. There is just no other way to put it. A way to combat some of the harms that have already been committed would be to return to the Metro Miami Action Plan that they originally instituted in the 90s that was geared towards empowering the Black residents. If they were to reinvest in these programs, they would be able to retain the Black population that they have and actually give them the opportunity to fulfill the United Nations SDG goals. All right, I will now pass it on to the next person.
All right, thank you, Sage. Next we have Dayton, Ohio.
All right, good morning, everyone. My name is Layton Rodwell, and my name is Kayla Travis. And we did Dayton, Ohio as our city for the SDG project. All right, so I want to echo Professor Hansford's sentiments on the lack of disaggregated data in these cities. It is a big point that we're trying to remedy with this project, but I found it to be especially a problem potentially because Dayton, Ohio isn't that large of a city and doesn't have as much like funding for research. So that was kind of a difficulty that we faced in seeking out some of these problems. And then of course, crafting solutions to problems we don't have too much information on. Overall, the total population for Black residents in Dayton is 36.4%. We partnered with the University of Dayton, and they were really integral in helping us decide where to focus our attention in terms of which SDGs to focus on. The first one that we focused on mostly was poverty. In terms of issues, 32% of the Black population in Dayton, Ohio is living under the poverty line. That's in comparison to the total poverty rate of 13.1%. Also, 29.2% of the Black population in Dayton owns the homes that they live in, whereas 61% of the white population owns the homes that they live in. So some solutions to that are programs that invest in the Black youth, the Black community at large, and offer both educational opportunities as well as entrepreneurial support and occupational training. And that also goes to employment. Another solution is to put systems in place to address the immediate needs of people in poverty. With inflation, this is an increasing issue. And so there are immediate needs for food and resources and housing assistance that, you know, programs that you might see like a long-term impact with just don't address. So that is another thing that we're looking to do. The second issue that we focused on, or I'm sorry, the SDG goal we focused on was peace, justice, and strong institutions. So I was surprised to kind of find this out, but Dayton, Ohio actually has a pretty big issue with crime, and it's only increased since the pandemic. Now, they also have an issue with mass incarceration, and their incarceration rates are highly, highly racialized. In 2021, Dayton had a 5.7 to 1 Black to white inmate ratio for prison and jail incarceration. And if you recall, the overall population of Dayton is only 36% Black. So at almost 6 times the amount of white folks who are in prison in Dayton. Also in 2021, there were 32 homicide victims, and 23 of them were Black. 24 of the arrests in these cases were also Black. So as I said, the crime rate has increased. I couldn't find specific data on homicides disaggregated for race for 2023. But this just kind of gives an idea of the percentage of violence and what communities that exists in. Now, solutions to these problems, I was disappointed at what I was able to find in terms of pretrial detention. And we do know that it's an issue of people being detained and their bail system in Dayton. But I wasn't able to figure out what percentage of people who are in prison and jail are there on pretrial detention rather than actually serving sentences for charges. And I think that would kind of give a better idea of who is facing mass incarceration just based off of poverty. Also, a big solution would be to invest in solutions that resolve economic disparities, because of course, where there's opportunity, some of these issues will simply resolve themselves.
So the next SDG category that we focused on was decent work and economic growth. So the first issue is in 2021, the unemployment rate for Black Americans was 15.6%. versus 5.8% for white Americans. And that was following directly after COVID. So the differences were more stark than the previous years. And then the second issue is that Black Americans with advanced degrees earned a median hourly wage of $30.32 compared to white Americans who earned $35.64. So the solutions that I thought about were greater education opportunities. So obviously, if you don't have an education, you have less of an ability to be employed, especially in areas that would pay you more money. So there's less work opportunities in professional areas, but even in those professional areas, Black Americans are paid less. So I also thought about the solution of transparency in pay audits so that employers would be able to, or they would have to explain why there are such stark differences between Black Americans and white Americans when it comes to how much they're paid hourly. We're passing it to the next student.
Thank you. And thanks for being with us, audience. I know we're running over a bit. We have, after this, we have one more city and then we'll be able to.
Hi, good morning. My name is Nandy Bryan, and the city I chose to focus on for the semester is Chicago. So to start off, Chicago is one of the most segregated cities in the United States. The Black population in Chicago is about 30%, with the white population being about 45%, but the city is split kind of in half, with the north side is a majority white population and the south side of Chicago is a majority Black or minority population. And one of the first things I want to focus on is in regards to the SDGs is the number 10, which is reduce inequalities. In Chicago, life varies very vastly by one's zip code. Even in, there's about a 30-year gap in life expectancies in Chicago of Black and white Chicagoans, depending on their zip code. And one case study, for example, in the neighborhood of Streetville, which is about 73% white, people can live to be about 90 years old. But if you go down 9 miles south in the neighborhood of Englewood, which is nearly 95% Black, Black people have a population life expectancy of about 60. And another SDG I wanted to focus on as well, which was quality education. There's a vast racial disparities in education in K through 12 students in Chicago. A lot of Black, because since Chicago is so highly segregated, a lot of schools with a significant Black population do not get the same amount of funding compared to their white counterparts. And this lack of funding leads to decreased resources in schools, and which forces students out of these schools, and parents are pulling their kids out of these schools since they're not producing great outcomes for them. And once these students are filed out of these public schools, the public schools continue to deteriorate, and the students that are already in these schools are just experiencing worse education outcomes. And Black students are also vastly suspended, both in and out of school, as doubled the district rate as a whole, and they're expelled at 4 times the rate of compared to their Latino counterparts, and 23% compared to their white counterparts. And another issue I wanted to focus on, which was the number 17 issues, was the partnerships with the goals. Here in Chicago, students of color are more likely to be subject to police surveillance, insufficient and intervention compared to their white counterparts. And they're also more likely to be likely in possession of illegal substances of that sort, and do these police surveilling of these youths. They're more likely to get into the juvenile justice system, which forces them to not be able to be productive members of society, or there's just a lot of misunderstanding about how these children get involved into these harmful spaces that force them to be in juvenile justice care. So is that it? And then another issue I wanted to focus on, they kind of combine in Chicago very interestingly, which was zero hunger and no poverty. As you can see from the map on the left side, specifically in the south side of Chicago, many people live below the poverty line, where you can see the darker green parts, about 82% of people are living below the poverty line in that region, as well as over 30% of Black families live below the poverty line in the whole of Chicago as well. And this is further exacerbated by lack of access to food and other resources. But I actually conducted my town hall this past Friday, and there were some great organizations that that focus on reducing hunger, and they have an open door policy to combat these issues, and just having people of the community coming in and getting meals and doing what they can to live a happy and healthy life. And the last SDG I wanted to focus on, which was which I was not aware of before I researched Chicago, was there's a lot of environmental issues happening in Chicago as well. In the past few years, the Chicago government has been accused of violating the civil rights of its residents by reallocating lots of polluting businesses from white communities into Black and Latino communities that are already like overwhelmed by a lot of injustice and infrastructure issues and other environmental and health issues. And yeah, and there's not a lot of being done about it. The government just still comes in, and that's like another impact of gentrification happening in the area as well. And yeah, these issues are just really exacerbated. Another or a few orgs that came to my town hall on Friday really emphasized these issues as a whole and referenced like the lack of community as well in Chicago to combat these issues. And they need to be addressed because the quality of life is just deteriorating for Black individuals as well as other people of color in Chicago. So yes, those are most of my findings, and I can, and my last finding I forgot to mention, Chicago, interestingly enough, is implementing a similar program to the SDGs called We Will Chicago. This is about a 50-year effort that included like a lot of research about communities in Chicago, and they kind of have similar frameworks that they're hoping to implement by 2030 as well, which includes like environment, climate and energy, public health and safety, and transportation infrastructure. So it'll be interesting to see how this is implemented throughout the next few years, and if Chicago can be in alignment with the SDGs. And I'll pass it on to our last colleague. Yes.
Hi, everyone. I'm Juan Roland, and I did my research on San Francisco, California for this project. One of the most striking statistics that came out during my research in San Francisco is their kind of ever increasingly shrinking Black population. In 1990, San Francisco had a Black population around 10.9%, but by 2021, that percentage had dropped to only 5.7%. This is such a well-known thing in the city that there's a running joke actually that the Blackest part of San Francisco is Oakland. This map, as you can see, demonstrates that much of the Bay Area, San Francisco included, is actually highly segregated as well. The white parts that you see here, those are more rural areas. The green parts are parks. Everywhere that's dark, those are highly segregated areas of the Bay Area. And as you can see, the only light areas are little pockets of San Francisco, but mind you, this data isn't disaggregated for exactly what areas are not segregated, and many of the light areas in San Francisco are white, Asian, and Latino, and many of them exclude that 5.7% of the Black population. One of the things that really stood out during my town hall on April 7th was the 4th and 8th FTG goals. Those deal with access to education and employment. Access to education in San Francisco mirrors the demographic disparities that the Black community is underrepresented in all of San Francisco's magnet schools. Many of these magnet schools feed into many of the tech jobs in San Francisco, and because Black students are kind of blocked out of these schools, they're also blocked out of many of the technological employment opportunities that the Bay Area can bring. Although San Francisco also boasts a near zero unemployment rate, the low proportion of the Black people in the city allows them to ignore the fact that over 40% of the Black men in the city are unemployed, since their number is negligible and kind of falls within that margin of error. So they can say it's zero, but looking close into the data, you see that it affects one group far more than any other. Solutions to this could include expanding access to education and confronting the unfavorable statistics about unemployment instead of just masking numbers. If this information was more well known by the city, it very well could be something that people actively work to change. Another issue in San Francisco is their homelessness crisis, and this disproportionately affects the Black community as well. Although San Francisco's Black community is less than 6% of the population, 30% of the people who are homeless in San Francisco are Black. This issue is just exacerbated by the gentrification and increasing rent and home prices. In San Francisco, they're kind of consistently pricing out Black families from the city. And when they don't have the option to move to other surrounding cities in the Bay Area, many of these families are forced into homelessness. One of the solutions that San Francisco is currently trying to implement is their reparations project. They've created a reparations task force in an attempt to right the wrongs that have plagued the Black community and San Francisco for the last century. Current ideas include a $5 million support payment, rent support payments, and $1 home prices in an attempt to alleviate the homelessness issue and allow the Black community to kind of get back on its feet within San Francisco. But one notable aspect of this initiative is that it sparked outrage across the country, as many people believe that these attempts to correct the horrors of the past are inherently discriminatory. And that is my current research in San Francisco.
All right, great. Thank you. All right, so thank you all. We're gonna stop sharing. So as you may have heard, all of the students are doing town hall meetings in the cities where they are doing their analysis. And in those town halls, we learn about not only the state of the Black community there, but also the history behind the community's problems. And we invite community organizations to brainstorm solutions, which we hope one day will be implemented in that city. And perhaps we can even have cities collaborate and share ideas. And ultimately, we hope to be able to use this data to make a positive change. So thank you all for audience. I don't know if there are a few questions that folks might have. I see a number of things here in the chat. I don't know if we have time to answer all of those, but combined.
Question.
Yes.
Question.
Yeah, I think Herschel, Daniels Jr.,
Yeah.
would you like to? Yes, please, go ahead.
Yeah, so in all the cities, are you and your students cognizant of Executive Order 13985? And are you cognizant of the Secretary Fudge's interagency plan for housing, as well as the release in September 27th of the President's National Plan to End Hunger and Nutrition and Health? And did you pull data from the Economic Development Agency from this SEDS, the Comprehensive Economic Development strategies in all those areas? And look forward to working with you to make that happen.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. I know, so they're still in the process of finishing their research project. So this information will be very helpful to them, I'm sure, as they go forward. And I see you also put some links here in the chat, so we appreciate that.
Yes, thank you. I'll see you next month in New York.
All right, great. Thank you.
Lucia Rodriguez, please.
First, just kudos to you and the students. Excellent, excellent work. And I'm really so inspired by it. And I asked myself, are you going to scale this up? In the sense that what you are doing now is I love it. And I hope to see some white, some paper that comes out of this that's written all up. But are you going to, be the leader or a guide in terms of in the US? We should be doing this all around the US because there's Black folks all over. So, and we need somebody like Howard University, yourself, leading this effort. So that's my question.
Thank you. I mean, I don't want to speak on the students' behalf, but I consider them leaders, and they are going to be, I'm sure, continuing to do their research. And as attorneys, they're going to be members of their community, working on these projects. I know myself, this is something that I do intend to scale up. We have a plan to create a new website where we will have the opportunity to include more cities. Perhaps people can contribute information virtually if we can't have a town hall in that city. I myself am going on sabbatical starting today. So, I will be working on this, however, continuing during my sabbatical, but hopefully we'll be able to engage students throughout this process. I have 2 more years left on my term. So the goal is to, before the end of my term at the UN, really scale this up as much as possible. Yeah, thanks for your encouragement.
Other questions, comments? We had a very lively chat going on the entire time, Professor Hansford. It was very
Yes,
hard to keep up
I hope we can capture the chat somehow. I'm not sure if that's possible. I see a number of people left their contact information here.
We will be able to share the recording and capture the full chat.
Okay, well, thank you very much for sticking around through the end. And we certainly thank Professor Hansford's law students. What a wonderful project. We hope to collaborate with him as part of SDSN, especially the Diversity, Equity, and Justice Working Group, as well as Howard University School of Education. Is there anything, can we just, before we leave, 3 takeaways? If your students or you can just give us 3 trends, ideas, something that we can, that you seen across the cities.
Well, yeah, again, I think they may have some ideas. I can say for myself, I've seen the ongoing crisis around environmental justice really emerge more so than I thought about before the project began. San Francisco, we learned about the Fillmore district and some of the things happening in also in Chicago at Thurgood Gardens, and I can go list each city. New Orleans, of course. Each city that we've had our town hall in has had an environmental justice crisis where toxic sites have been strategically placed near Black communities, and we need to find a way to remedy that and also provide reparations for that. Also, the question of unity. There is this lack of what's the word? I guess cultural engagements happening in communities. So we really need to continue to build a sense of togetherness so we can get more participation, more optimism, because for some people said these town halls that we're hosting should have hundreds of people in them. And oftentimes it had dozens, if that. So that's something that we want to continue to engage people on and try to get our community to think that this is a worthy project, that the SDGs are something that can help people have better lives. And of course, the impact of housing segregation has led to the need for reparations. I believe that one of my conclusions right now is that we will never have these SDGs fulfilled for Black people without reparations, because there's too much of a gap in terms of economic disparities and criminal justice disparities, that they're not going to be able to fill those gaps with regular policies. It's going to take something like reparations, like the city of San Francisco has proposed, to do what is necessary in these cities. So those are my 3 quick conclusions so far, but it's not over yet. They're still doing their research.
Absolutely. All right, so no other further comments or questions? We'd like to thank you once again.
Ms. Bond?
Yes, please.
Thank you. Sorry for the late request. I am Ram Alagan. I'm a professor of geography at Alabama State University in Montgomery. This is a great presentation, Dr. Hansford. It's fantastic. The students did a fantastic job. My kind request is to the institution, if it is possible. Now, we had in the United States probably, I guess, about 150 HBCUs. Currently, we have 103 because of whatever the performance that we don't achieve. Schools are getting closed. So my kind request is, if it is possible, extend the invitation to include more HBCUs into the discussions, because most of the HBCU are located in very, very high poverty neighborhoods. They may have a lot of insights to bring to these discussions, and why the equal justice is not equally distributed for the HBCUs. For example, I will give you one example, the school that I am here, because I'm using GIS to do cancer mapping and poverty and development and so on and so forth. So in my neighborhood, if you draw the poverty line, medium income close to my campus, about $18,000. If you go 2 miles beyond that campus, it is $120,000. So if you see this kind of disparity, definitely there's another perspective that we can discuss about HBCUs and their location in the neighborhood. That's my request. Thank you so much.
Great, thank you, thank you. Yeah, if anyone is able to connect us to more HBCUs, we're happy to do so. No, thank you all. We really enjoyed hearing your feedback and looking forward to staying in touch going forward. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.